Yes, about 10:30, I believe it was 10:30 at night, I heard the front door open, which was to my back. I turned around and I saw Alex carrying JJ, and JJ was asleep and his head was on his shoulder.
And what did Lori Vallow say to you about what happened to JJ on the 23rd?
She said he was out of control and she couldn't control him, so she had Alex come and get him.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. This is the last image of 7-year-old JJ VALLOW. It was taken on the night of September 22nd, presumably by Alex Cox, while Lori, Melanie and David Warwick were recording a religious podcast in Lori's kitchen in an adjacent apartment. When JJ's remains were discovered underneath reams of duct tape, JJ was dressed in these red pajamas. You may remember that David Warwick, when he testified, said that effectively Lori's explanation to him was that overnight, almost like while he was having a nightmare, JJ knocked over a picture of Christ, and as a result, by the time they woke up the next morning, JJ had basically been sent, I think Alex had taken JJ, and then ultimately the story was that JJ was dispatched to K, none of which was true. But the whole story surrounding JJ's last straw, effectively for Lori, was knocking over a picture of Christ. That was like the unforgivable sin. And so I want to deal with 6 questions surrounding this incident, kind of quote-unquote incident, as well as the symbolic psychology surrounding it. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you haven't followed me on Twitter, I'm at Crime Rocket. I'm obviously in court. I will be in court again on Monday, just giving my observations, giving my impressions, live tweeting from the inside of the courtroom. It's maybe a little bit different having an outsider comment on the American justice system. And so if you're interested in that, please follow my Twitter stream. I tweet under the hashtag Lori Vallow Trial, and I'm at Crime Rocket. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also pay for a Uber ride by hitting the thanks button. And let's get started. So the first question is, was it premeditated? Lori's story was that JJ was out of control. Those were her words. And then he knocked something over while I guess he was out of control. I think she said to some officer that he was like off the walls kind of thing. Almost like a lunatic. And, you know, if it's true, it suggests almost a random response that out of nowhere, JJ acted in a strange way and Lori then responded. Lori reacted. But the reality is JJ's death, I think, had likely been coming a long time. Do you agree with that? That, bear in mind, Lori's relationship with Chad was also a long time coming. And this whole idea that JJ was possessed by a demon or a zombie was also a long time coming. So, and bear in mind also, someone died before JJ, and that was Tylee. So JJ was sort of almost on a conveyor belt. And so possibly when Lori discovered that Charles's insurance wasn't going to pay out, that is possibly when other targets may have entered the crosshairs. Do you agree with that? But it's important to be clear that the premeditation likely was brewing as early as February 2019, 6 months earlier. It's a long time to be contemplating, thinking about, perhaps even fantasizing about your new life, your new honeymoon, your new world order kind of thing. And we know that because that's what Lori told April Raymond in Hawaii. She said her words were that she was done with JJ. So was JJ also out of control in February 2019? So that brings us to the next question. were David and Melanie used to manufacture an alibi? And I kind of mean that in the sense of without their knowledge, were they used sort of cynically? It almost feels random that JJ died on or close to the 23rd, doesn't it? If Melanie and David were in the apartment very close to that time and very close to where it happened. But on the other hand, if JJ's death was premeditated, then perhaps the reason David and Melanie needed to be around was basically to see JJ at the last possible moment so they could vouch for him, to say, oh yes, we saw him. And I think that holds hands with the whole trip to Yellowstone, which I think was also to show, yeah, we are having a happy family moment, it's all innocent. We all love each other. And then since Melanie ended up being Laurie's alibi, Melanie Gibb, or let's say attempted alibi, Laurie could also theoretically say that on the last day she was with JJ, Melanie had come to visit. And then she didn't know what happened, thereby potentially implicating Melanie if it came to that. And Melanie Gibb has even said that at a certain point, a light went on where she thought, is she going to become the fall guy? And that's also what Alex Cox thought. That brings us to the third question. Why did JJ need to be out of the way? Well, for financial reasons primarily, that's in my opinion, but also because JJ would interfere with Laurie's marriage to Chad. And then also to smooth the way for the sort of things Laurie was interested in doing, such as podcasts, without being interrupted. The whole thing of sending JJ away, I'm talking about on the night of September 22nd, sending him somewhere else while Laurie was doing a podcast, can you see that that is a kind of psychological analogy for what Laurie intended overall, in a general sense, right, in the greater picture? And so that brings us to the next point. Was he really out of control? So think about it. Who was really out of control here? A 7-year-old, or Laurie going onto her 5th marriage shortly after the murder of both her husband and eldest daughter, and of course Chad's wife as well. So who is really out of control? JJ or Laurie and Chad? So the other thing that's quite interesting is when you hear Laurie talking about Charles's murder, it actually feels like Darvo. It sort of feels like she's inverting everything she's done, everything she's said, everything she's felt, puts it onto them. She reverses the whole thing. She inverts the whole thing. And so that raises the question, did he really knock over Portrait of Christ? And I think the answer is no, simple as that. He didn't. But what Laurie is doing, I think, is maximizing the harm that someone causes in her schema, in her mythos. Right? She maximizes the harm by, like, what if it knocked over a portrait of the Grand Tetons? But a portrait of Christ seems almost like something ominous, something sacrilegious, something blasphemous. So she can maximize the harm when she tells a story, when it's against her, and also minimize the harm done to someone else. Charles, for example, dies of a heart attack. Tammy, for example, coughs and dies in her sleep. You know, Charles didn't die of a heart attack. He was shot twice through the chest and abdomen. Tylee's murder appearing initially as her simply being absent. She's simply at college. She's simply wanting to be independent. That's pretty euphemistic given how she ends up and where she ends up. How we find her remains and how little we find of her. Did she really want to be independent? Is that really what happened to her? And so why symbolically is this knocking over of a portrait of Christ such a compelling argument? It's because anyone who imagines the demon possession thing is real, like Zulema, perhaps like Melanie, would see this as the final straw, that the demon is actually saying, I'm taking you on, I'm starting to break things and I'm starting to take possession of this home, right? And so in that sense, it's symbolizing, it's suggesting, it's inferring, it's implicating, in a sense, the last straw of a demon that has crossed a line, the demon is now out of control and needing to be stopped. But of course, where is that actual demon? It's being imagined in someone else's mind. The demon is kind of a scapegoat for what someone is actually meaning to do. They're trying to actually do something else. So does that make sense? So I want to conclude by referring to a comment from someone, I'm not going to mention their name, but someone who said, you know what, JJ may well have been out of control. Maybe JJ did knock over a framed picture of Christ, perhaps in defiance. And what I think you've got to think about is, this is one of the worst true crime cases I've ever dealt with. It's almost like the Chris Watts case times 3. It's an incredibly horrible case. With Chris Watts, as bad as it was, he annihilated his family, and no one else was involved, right? In this case, you've got 3 people conspiring to commit murder according to the state's case. Laurie, Chad, and Alex, as I understand it. And then they're also trying to widen that to cult members. That's infinitely worse. And then pinning it all in a way on the devil or on God or on whatever they believe, right? So if you think about the Chris Watts case and you put it within the mythos of the Laurie Vallow case, literally Chris Watts wanting to have a relationship with Nicole Kessinger, but Nicole Kessinger's got a partner, asked Nicole Kessinger to murder her husband, and then Chris Watts asks his sister to murder his children and his spouse. And then instead of having one person's life destroyed because they've gone over into the criminal psychology, you've actually got at least 3 people. And that's besides the people that have been killed as well. Can you see how it's kind of tripling the size of the scale of the criminal story? It's devastating. It's terrible. So I think if you haven't gone around the corner where you think, I don't think Laurie lied. I don't think Laurie would have done that. I actually think maybe the kids were a little bit behaving in a certain way. I think if you're thinking that, you haven't gone around the corner where you realize the person that you're dealing with. A very manipulative, deceitful, deceptive person. And I don't use the word evil lightly, but someone who is literally using good with evil intent. I'm talking about using the beliefs that people have. You know, people believe in goodness, and people believe in, the goodness in other people. And so this whole idea that you're being possessed by a demon is kind of within the framework that you're trying to battle evil. And so the whole thing is inverted, that you're trying to battle evil by actually using other people, and guess where the evil is actually coming from. And so that actually makes this a frightening story. It's frightening to see how some people can be influenced. It's frightening to see how you can have such a lack of critical thinking. And that is the conversation we really need to be having. Are we being influenced in certain ways where we think things, believe things, do things simply because someone tells us something? So that is the thought I want to leave you with. This whole idea of, is someone telling you that JJ knocked over a picture of Christ? It's a symbolic thing, but it's actually not real. But they're telling you something that they know is going to trigger you, know is going to trigger your symbolic psychology. And so you've got to be aware that there are people who are using what you are sensitive to and compassionate towards for their own agenda. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.
Being a good mom is very important to me, and a good wife, and a good worker, and being all those things together is not easy. So I'm basically a ticking time bomb.